Behind her tightly closed eyelids, through the double barrier of the curtains and the thin silks which served as her bed's canopy, she could feel the rays of the sun shining down on her. "Good morning, time to get up and let me sleep a while longer." These two parts of her shouted back and forth in their struggle to seize control of her body. Just as she was drifting in and out of slumber, the room door opened quietly and someone entered. While the thick carpet covering the floor muffled their footsteps, she could still sense someone moving through the room. This person walked over to the side of her bed and stopped. "Good morning, Keno-sama. Today's weather is good too." Ooh, Her eyes opened ever so reluctantly, and the familiar smile of the maid Nastasia came into view. The fact that she had been permitted to address Keno, the princess of this country, by her given name, was because she was Keno's handmaiden. Nastasia was one of the more highly placed servants in the castle, and in her youth, there had been rumors that she would become the next headmaid. Her abilities were exceptional, and she even had in-depth magical training. One could say that it had been smooth sailing all the way to her present station. It was precisely because Keno was her father's only daughter that she was permitted to stand by Keno's side. Such was a sign of the favor she had received. However, Keno felt that she would probably not wind up as the headmaid, because she would probably end up becoming the first wife of some noble, and then resign her position. Seeing that Keno had already risen, Nastasia went over to the window and forcefully opened it. Just as she had described earlier, the room was filled with blinding sunlight. Having just departed sweet dreamland, her eyes were painfully seared by the light, and she could not help squeezing them shut again. Only after her eyes had gradually gotten used to the sunlight through her eyelids, did Keno slowly open them once again. The warm sunlight poured into the room, as if to tell her that today would be a peaceful, wonderful day filled with warmth. "Alright, Keno-sama. I shall prepare water for you right away." There was an empty silver basin on the small round table. After Nastasia cast a spell on it, the basin was promptly filled with clean water. Nastasia had just cast a first-tier lifestyle spell, also known as the lifestyle spell tradition known as Create Water. While zero-tier spells could also create drinkable water, the water created by this spell tasted better. Since they both used the same amount of mana, popular opinion held that better-tasting water was superior, even if it had not been created for drinking purposes. It would seem Nastasia felt the same way too. As a first-tier spell, the water generated by Create Water was not limited to just filling a single basin. While there was a time limit to it, the overall volume of water created, which would increase along with the caster's skills, could be parceled out over multiple occasions. Therefore, there would be no spillage and waste even if she cast a spell on the basin. Incidentally, Nastasia was a magic caster who had attained the second tier. On cold days, she could use the second-tier lifestyle spell Temperature Change to alter the temperature of the water until it was comfortable, or to directly heat the room. Keno had read from a book that there was a third-tier lifestyle spell called Hot Spring. Apparently it was an imitation of the druid spell Geyser. The book's author had written, "It feels really good," and so Keno wanted to personally try it once. Unfortunately, none of the maids in the castle could cast such a high-tier lifestyle spell. Therefore Keno could only read about the effects of Hot Spring from her books. While there were magic casters in the castle who could cast third-tier spells, those people typically studied battle spells, and did not have the time to learn lifestyle magic on top of that. In that case, I'll just learn it myself. Keno had once told the people around her, specifically her magic instructors. Back then, Keno had been younger than she was now, at an age where she could barely cast first-tier spells. It would not be unusual for someone hearing a young girl like that, saying that she wanted to cast a third-tier spell, which was typically the province of the naturally gifted, to regard it as the naive declarations of a child. That is, if that child was not Keno. Keno's parents, her father could cast fourth-tier spells, while her mother could go even further and cast fifth-tier spells, were genius magic casters of extraordinary talent. Thus, as the scion of both their bloodlines, everyone believed that it was very likely that she could make good on her words. Therefore, 2 hours after making that statement, she had been summoned before her father and sternly rebuked. There was a limit to how many spells everyone could learn, and as royalty, she ought to learn more useful spells. The young Keno had retorted that it was precisely because she was royalty that she should not learn offensive, defensive, or divinatory spells, and instead learn spells that would make everyone happy. However, her father had said this: "Our country is not a peaceful one. There's no telling when these quiet, peaceful days will come to an end, and a king must personally go to the battlefield. Therefore, anyone with the potential to become an exceptional magic caster should learn battle-effective spells." After hearing her father's answer, Keno abandoned her plans to learn Hot Spring. Her father's words had been well-reasoned, and she was not yet old enough to fully understand what he meant by them. On the one hand, she lacked the courage to resist her stern father, and on the other, she was not particularly obsessed in her pursuit of hot springs. Rather, it was because her father spoke in a kingly way, which reminded her of the stories of heroic adventure that Nastasia had once read to her. He sounded just like them, and it left a deep impression in her heart. From that day on, Keno made a wish that she kept secret from everyone else, that she would become strong one day, like the heroes in the storybooks or like her father, and fight gallantly for the people. The girl who held that dream in her heart got off the bed, walked to Nastasha's side, and began washing her face. The splashing water spattered her surroundings, but she did not mind it. The temperature-adjusted water made by Create Water, which could be freely deposited within a certain radius according to the caster's will, washed away Keno's sleepiness. Keno used the towel Nastasha handed her to wipe her face clean and began brushing her teeth. Then she gargled the water in her glass, rinsed her mouth, and spat it out into the basin. After seeing Keno do all this, Nastasha cast Destruction Water. The water in the basin, as well as the water that had splashed out of it, vanished as though they had been an illusion. This first-tier spell was not lifestyle magic, but belonged to one of the 4 great traditions also known as the elemental traditions, and could be used for offensive purposes. It did less damage when used against living beings than other spells of the same tier. However, it could do significant damage to water elementals and other creatures, closely aligned with the element of water. Higher-level versions of the 3rd tier could also affect slimes to some extent. The 4th tier spell Dehydration could do great damage to all living beings. The lower tier versions of these spells were typically used to eliminate water in this fashion. After rinsing her mouth, Keno walked over to the changing mirror, which was roughly as tall as she was, and quickly changed into the clothes Nastasha handed her. While certain nobles would even let their vassals handle dressing them, Keno's family insisted on them changing on their own. It was a family rule to help them prepare for battle, so they could put on armor by themselves, never mind that full-plate armor needed the help of squires to don. However, it was perfectly acceptable to let others help comb her hair while she was changing. After wetting her curled hair with Create Water, Nastasha pressed it down with a moistened towel. Once Nastasha let go, the hair was straightened out. And so, Keno Fasris Invern, the sole daughter of King Fasris, took shape. The familiar image of herself she saw reflected in the mirror was a girl with eyes that reflected all the colors of the rainbow. These rainbow eyes were not unique to Keno. The maid who was staring at Keno while carrying out the final checks, Nastasha, also possessed them. They were called the Rainbow Eyes, and they were a common sight in the country of the rainbow-eyed people. Rather, it was the people who did not possess them that were a rarity. Now then, please proceed to the dining room, Keno-sama. Are both of them there today? Yes. Both of them are waiting for you, Keno-sama. To Keno, mealtimes were joyful occasions, but also ones which weighed on her. Because she could see her father then. Her father was frequently out on business both in the royal capital and other cities, due to his eagerness to work. Even his daughter Keno would have many days when she would not get to see him at all. Therefore, she was very happy to meet her father. However, Keno's father was very harsh on her, so he usually scolded her whenever they met, which made her uneasy. That said, she could not run away from it. Trailing Nastasha in her wake, Keno walked to the dining room. Just as Nastasha had said, her parents were waiting for her within the dining room. Naturally, their maids were also present. In particular, the head maid and assistant head maid were standing behind her father and mother. Keno's mother had a warm, gentle look on her face. Truth be told, her personality was much the same, and Keno had few memories of ever being scolded by her, and she was also a top-class magic caster of this nation, even though one could not tell just by her looks. Her father, on the other hand, was the opposite. Rainbow-eyed people tended to be slender of frame and gifted in the 4 elemental traditions, which would lead them to enter the appropriate magic-using professions. Therefore, they were focused on spellcasting ability rather than physical abilities, and tended to lack muscular bodies. However, Keno's father was a notable exception. Not only was he a powerful fire elementalist, he also possessed a brawny physique that embodied the word powerhouse, and his brow was deeply furrowed to go with his stern countenance. Whether he was eating or not, he always wore a gauntlet on his left arm that was shaped to resemble a griffin's talons. It was the national treasure known as the Gauntlet of the Griffin Lord. It was a magic item that could summon a Griffin Lord for a total of 24 hours in the span of a week. Since the summoned Griffin Lord could be resummoned in a week's time even if it were killed, generations of kings had historically used it to call up a vanguard for them. However, Keno's father was the only one who did not use it in that way. Good morning, father, mother. Good morning, Keno. In contrast to her mother's gentle greeting, her father simply furrowed his brow and nodded curtly, but that was how he usually was. Rather, if he had smiled like her mother had, Keno would be confused instead. This country had a thriving dairy industry, and so the royal capital did not want for fresh cheese. A particular note was the fact that it was to be expected that the dining tables of the royal household would have at least 3 different kinds of cheese on them. In addition, there was sour cream, drinks made from blending milk, and the freshly squeezed juices of 4 different fruits, and so on. Also, there were thick slices of evenly roasted ham. The plates laden with white bread were accompanied by intoxicatingly beautiful pats of golden butter. Keno along with her father and mother, who were dining, looked at the ring on her right hand, but the sapphire blue gemstone set into it did not change color. They began to eat. Eating was a place for etiquette. Since it had been inculcated into her ever since she had come of age, it had long since become a part of her. As they ate in silence, her father placed his fork on the table with a quiet clink. She glanced over and saw that her father had picked up his napkin to wipe his mouth. Now then, Annie. To what degree have her magical abilities improved? Annie was the name of Keno's mother. She was called Annie Fasris. Annie put down her fork and wiped her mouth as well. My husband, currently this child seems to have gotten a feel for the second tier. Who knows, she might soon become capable of wielding its rudiments. I heard that a fortnight ago. In other words, there's been no improvement, am I wrong? Keno, what do you think? Do you feel stronger than before? Keno swallowed her food, then put down her fork and wiped her mouth like her mother had. During that time, she thought about how to answer her father, but the truth was that she did not feel much different between now and 2 weeks ago. It was like how nobody could sense how much they were growing every day without measuring it. It was true that she had felt something strange when she had first become capable of casting first-tier spells. It was like gears meshing within her body. However, there had been no signs before that. Therefore, she could only answer honestly. I'm not sure. I see. Honesty is a good policy, but that alone cannot be all. You are my first child. In the future, your younger brothers and sisters will be born, and you will have to be an example for them. My king, she is still young. Shut up. Her father coldly interrupted her mother's impending criticism. However young she is still royalty. The king's gaze was cutting as it turned to her. Frightened, Keno glanced pleadingly to her mother. She is a girl. She is more than a girl, she is a princess, she is royalty. Well, there is no need to outdo everyone else, being overshadowed will be troublesome. After all, you are a better magic caster than I am. Her father turned to look at a place without anyone, and he coughed. Which is why we got married, didn't we, he muttered. Then, he looked at Keno again with his steely eyes. For that reason, I gave this child to you so you could teach her, but you have been too lax with her education, I think. Live combat is the best form of training. While she is a child and not yet fully grown, surely she ought to start weapons training too, no? It's important to see if she's gifted in that field too. It was true that Keno's father was inferior to her mother as a magic caster. However, given that her father was able to fight with a spear, he was the better combatant. I am opposed to that. According to what I have seen, I don't think this child is like you, gifted with weapons. Until she awakens an affinity for one of the 4 great powers, we ought to keep on training her as a magic caster. More importantly, I forbid her to take part in anything as dangerous as live combat. Back then, things were different. Rather than learning to write with both hands, it's faster to learn to do it with just one. I know that's what you want to say. However, we don't know where her talents lie. Don't you think it would be better to let her try everything? I feel that would be better to help this child prepare for her future. I agree on that point. However, I feel that it should wait until she's at least reached the 2nd tier first. If you want her to take part in martial instruction, then it should at least wait until her body is fully developed first. The two of them locked gazes, neither of them letting up. A while later, her father looked away. I understand. I'll continue leaving it in your care. I am deeply grateful, my king. Keno. Keno jumped as she heard her father's steely voice. Her father noticed it, but ignored it and began speaking. As the royal family of this country, we enjoy luxurious lives, and the loyalty of many people. And all that is because we have done our duty as the nation's royalty. Therefore you must learn and absorb everything and make good use of it. It is true that our country is peaceful now. But who knows, we might be invaded someday. Therefore we need a wealthy nation and a strong army. I don't want to invade other people. Her father's face twisted slightly. Was he angry, or was he laughing, or perhaps sad? It was a nuanced expression that was hard to make out. However, there was no severity in what he said next.